live. I am reading out of Lord of the Horizon. It is a far memory book by Joan Grant. She passed away in 1989 and she wrote books about her own far memories. This is a chapter of the third part. It's chapter 4 and I finished, it's entitled Younger Brothers, and I finished it halfway through because of the battery. This is her life as Ra-Ab, and we are talking here about his sister Becket, who is going to get married. When Neri took me to the temple, where in a few days he and Becket would take the oath before Ptah, I was interested to see that the statue in the sanctuary of Anubis was not in the form of a jackal, but a man with a jackal's head. I remembered that I had seen Anubis represented in this way in one of my father's papyri, described before the oldest pyramids were built. When I commented on this to Neri, he said, "That statue was placed there by my father. If he had not been called to the watchers, he might well have become a priest, for he remembered more than passed in the waking day. For he remembered more than passed in the waking day. I was very young when he died, but the scribe who taught me had been his close friend and often spoke of him. Through the scribe I came to see not the nomarch and the warrior, but the man who had dreamt dreams." Then Neri went on. "My great-uncle, who, as you know, was nomarch under the old rule, was suspicious of everything which gave pleasure, saying that Set gilded the nets in which he snared mankind. He allowed no vines to be planted, nor were there dancing girls or harp players in his time. He was just according to the limits of his vision, but he was a bleak man. He could find no warmth even in Ra. He tried to make my father believe that everything which could beguile the senses was evil, and told him stories of the country through which a man passed on his way to the underworld. There were flowers there, but each hid a poisonous spider. There was lush grass which whispered with snakes. There were young and lovely women, but when a man took one of them in his arms, it was to find her flesh was soft only because it had already crawled with maggots. So the boy became assailed with fearful night terrors. He had been taught that his uncle's authority was absolute, second only to Pharaoh, whom he felt sure was still more bleak and incomprehensible. He was too proud to tell anyone of his fears, until at last, when they became unbearable, he spoke of them to the scribe. The scribe told him to seek peace through Anubis, and gradually the night terrors gave way before the light of true dreams. The words of his uncle could no longer inspire fear, and were recognized as the worthless utterances of a man of narrow heart. In sleep he saw a wide horizon and went among people who laughed and sang and were beautiful, who gloried in each other and rejoiced in their strength, and yet were most pleasing to the gods. While awake he had to be obedient to his uncle. He was not allowed to choose his friends, and as those chosen for him were distasteful, he preferred his own company. That is how he became to learn so much of animals, for they gave him their friendship without thought of expediency. Each time a new link was created between him and an animal, so did he find a new link with Anubis. He realized that when men say, "Such and such a man is evil because he behaves like an animal," it shows that the speaker is evil and despises his body, which he should have honored in the name of Ptah. My father knew that a child must grow strong on milk before it is ready for wine. Only a fool demands that the strength which the milk gave to him be taken away, for if that were granted, he would be a starveling, too weak to lift the wine to his lips, even though it were a royal vintage. So also does a man who denies the strength he learned as an animal become too feeble to seek further wisdom. That is why our statue of Anubis is in this semblance, so that all who see it may remember that gods are born when men and animals together have given strength to the spirit. Neri showed me not only his personal estate, but many other parts of the nome, while, to Mary's delight, Becket willingly accepted to stay at home to arrange the final preparations for the wedding festival. I was greatly impressed with the magnificence of his herds. Never had I seen oxen more sleek or cows with such rich udders, and the sheep had sound feet and long fine fleeces. Nowhere did I see a beast in poor condition. I was delighted to see this practical aspect of Neri's ideal. Once, as a young man, he had visited a noble in the north who prided himself on his kindness to animals. No meat was eaten in his household, nor was any animal killed within his boundaries. There I had seen an ox, blind with age, lying helpless in its stall. Flies had gathered on its festering sores, undisturbed by the feeble quiver of his side. I had asked that I might be allowed to set it free of its pain, and only the courtesy due to a guest saved me from being reviled as a monster of cruelty. Even courtesy had not prevented my host from exclaiming, "I regret that I must deny the favor you ask. I regret also that any man should wish to attack a beast which is too weak to defend itself." I told this story to Neri, and he said, "It is sometimes difficult to make people realize that there are occasions when to allow others to continue to suffer pain is as though one inflicted pain upon them. It is for the gods to call men to their kingdom, but the gods have given us responsibilities towards animals, so that we may learn how one day to become gods to men. We betray both ourselves and the gods if, through fear of exceeding our authority, we refuse to take our proper responsibility. I know that sometimes my guests who have heard how animals are honored in this nome are surprised to find meat at my table. Some of them have even cried out, "How can you bear to eat animals when you call them your brothers?" There are always people who confuse love with false sentiment. I explain to them that should Min of his wisdom decide that my cows and ewes should have but one male to 100 females, then there would no longer be meat served in any household of the hare. The cows give milk to our children, and in return, when they are too old to calve, they are given all they require for their contented age, but as though they were warriors too old to fight. So are our sheep honored for the gift of their wool. When age prevents their days being pleasurable to them, or if they should become afflicted by a disease for which as yet we have not discovered a rapid cure, then they are given a swift and painless death. But should all the bulls and rams be allowed to mature and live out their normal span, soon all the herds would go hungry, for there would not be sufficient pasture. The finest of them are kept to sear new herds, and there are some of my strain in nearly every nome. The rest are sent on their long journey when they are a year old. Why should it cause them pain that the flesh which they no longer use is of benefit to those who have been their friends? He laughed. Though this, to many, would sound blasphemy, I think that another instance of the wisdom of beasts is that they would prefer that the body which once was of use to them should be of use to others, rather than that it should be wasted in a sarcophagus. In the nome of the hare, each town and most of the larger villages had an estate to which sick animals were taken, either to be cured or to be released from a body which had become a prison. Great care was exercised that they should never die in fear, for the seers had said that the places where under the old rule animals had been slaughtered were grey with terror. This terror was immediately sensed by those who came after, and it added to the shameful record of the priests of Set, and to those men of ignorance who had worn priestly robes, that this grayness was most intense in places where the temple bulls had been sacrificed. At each such estate there was a healer priest, and men trained both in the use of herbs and with a knife. Here all herdsmen and others whose work brought them into contact with animals had to be trained for 3 months before taking up office or entering into an inheritance. The strain of several breeds had been improved by mating those specially selected, and because of this, many thousands of animals now found their bodies more pleasant to live in. The food suitable to the requirements of each kind had been studied, and considerable tracts of land were under new fodder crops. In pastures which had no shade trees, thatched shelters had been provided. Many new water channels had been cut and shallow wallows dug, so that an animal could seek relief from flies by rolling in the soft mud. So greatly had the yield of wool increased that the gnome now had work for 300 extra weavers, and many hundreds of cubits of fine woolen cloth were available for barter each year. The health of the people had been greatly benefited by the increased quantities of milk, cheese, butter, and curds, both from cows and goats, which had been added to their food. In addition, all could now eat fish. To make this possible, Neri had provided all villages which were distant from the river with large artificial ponds kept fresh by water from the extended irrigation channels. These were kept stocked with fish and were of great value to people who in the old days had never tasted it, except when salted. For transport had been too costly, when so large a proportion stank before reaching its destination. Everything I saw made me yet more grateful to the gods for finding Becket a husband so near to my heart. I told this to him on the morning of the day when he became my son before Ptah. He answered, "If you see wisdom in my gnome, it is because I learned wisdom in the oryx. If in me there is any virtue, it is because Becket has taught me the meaning of love." Their love for each other shone like living rays upon all who saw Becket and Neri on the day of their marriage. Tetinan had been wise when he said they looked as though they walked together through the fields of Ra. Happy were the crowds who lined the roads to the temple to watch their nomarch pass, and even the white oxen who walked in the procession with garlands around their necks and gilded horns might have been blessed by Hathor, and perhaps they were. Many hundreds joined in the great feast, which lasted far into the night. Jar after jar of wine was opened, and when one group of singers fell silent, others took up the song. Yet the nomarchs of the hair shared more than wine with their people. They shared with them their joy. This was chapter 4, and the next chapter is chapter 5, the Great River. This plays before the flood, a long, long time ago.